Good evening, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for attending today's webinar for our new report, The Threat of Landfill Leachate to Drinking Water in the Hudson and Mohawk Rivers. We appreciate seeing so many of our community partners, agencies, and organizations in attendance, and we see you all slowly coming in, so thank you so much for spending an hour and 15 minutes or so with us this evening. My name is Rebecca Martin, and I'm the project manager as part of the Hudson and Mohawk River Leachate Collaborative. A few housekeeping items. So today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll be providing a recording of tonight's webinar as well as other materials later in the week so that you have them and you can share them with your colleagues as soon as possible. We hope to keep building awareness about the Leachate Loophole. We'll also be providing actions and next steps at the end of our presentation, followed by a question and answer period to answer as many of your questions as possible this evening. You'll be able to add your questions into the Q&A box. So if you look at the bottom of your screen in the menu, there's a function, a Q&A function that you can start to load your questions into, and I would encourage you to wait until the end of our presentation because we might answer your question along the way. We're going to answer as many questions as we can this evening, but if we don't get to yours, we'll also share a link to our contact page so that you can send us your questions because they're important to us, and we can address them easily that way as a follow-up. So one little tidbit before we launch into our team, I think it's notable to share that our report was released 3 weeks ago, just about 3 weeks ago on December the 17th. And we've been hearing from dozens and dozens of groups and communities, municipalities, counties from all over the United States since that time. So it's clear to us that this problem is critically important and that the public cares deeply about it once they're made aware of it. So it's our pleasure to be working on this very challenging problem. And who are we? So the Hudson and Mohawk Rivers Leachate Collaborative includes myself, Rebecca Martin. I'm the project manager for this project. Jen Epstein, who's our GIS analyst and lead writer. Captain John Lipscomb, who's our technical advisor. The PACE Environmental Litigation Clinic, who has been providing legal research for this project, and the Good Work Institute, who serves as our fiscal sponsor. So in the spring of 2023, freshwater ecologist Jen Epstein and I began meeting weekly to continue collaborating on critical environmental issues after our time at Hudson Riverkeeper. We focused on landfill leachate, or liquid waste, or garbage water, from landfills that are sent to municipal wastewater treatment plants unequipped to monitor or to filter out toxic chemicals, synthetic chemicals. These pollutants, it turns out, are discharged into the Hudson and Mohawk Rivers, which became our project area, which provide drinking water for 368,000 people, including historically marginalized communities already facing environmental burdens. We chose this issue as our first independent project because Captain John Lipscomb, who we also worked with at Hudson Riverkeeper, championed this issue for decades and emphasized the urgent need for stronger regulations and public action. Together, John, Jen, and I, we had lunch last week, and we realized that together we bring nearly 50 years of experience protecting the Hudson River, a legacy that's reflected in this report. And speaking of 50 years, the report was released on the 17th, the day after the 50th anniversary of the Safe Drinking Water Act. And so while we celebrate the progress of the act, the work highlights in the report the need to confront harmful practices and safeguard water resources for future generations. Early in our conversations with John, Captain John, he said something that really struck me, and I wrote it down. Industrial waste is not gone from our rivers, it's just hidden. And I get goosebumps every time I say it. Since then, we've been determined to identify the regulatory gaps that allow landfill leachate, and that also includes industrial wastewater. The toxic liquid formed as water percolates through landfills, garbage water. I'm going to keep saying that because sometimes people don't know what leachate actually is. So garbage water, to pollute the Hudson and Mohawk Rivers that are drinking water sources and are part, as I said, of our project area. So today, this regulatory failure that we call the Leachate Loophole exposes the weaknesses across laws governing solid waste, surface water, and drinking water, leaving our rivers and drinking water sources vulnerable to contamination. To get us started, I'm pleased to introduce my colleague Jen Epstein, who's the GIS analyst and lead writer for the Hudson and Mohawk River Leachate Collaborative, who's going to tell you more about our report. Jen is a freshwater ecologist, a geospatial scientist, and water quality advocate who combines data and policy analysis to untangle complex problems. She's particularly interested in how stormwater, drinking water, and wastewater infrastructure systems connect with natural ecosystems. Her past work includes building and managing Riverkeeper's community-based water quality monitoring program. So I'm going to turn it over to Jen now. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca, and good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here after a long day and joining us this evening. Rebecca mentioned that leachate loophole is the term. You can go ahead to that slide, the map. Leachate loophole is the term that we've created to describe the reason that toxic landfill leachate that would not be allowed to be discharged directly from a landfill is allowed to pass through wastewater treatment plants into rivers that are used as drinking water sources. It is standard practice for industrial waste streams of many types to flow into municipal wastewater treatment plants. And to people who are familiar with these infrastructure systems, it is not a surprise that landfill leachate is one of them. But up until this project, the scope and scale of this practice hadn't yet been summarized for the public. So the goal of tonight and of our project overall is to share that summary information so that communities, especially communities that use the Hudson and the Mohawk River for drinking water sources, can become aware of how landfill leachate is disposed of and can use the information here to protect their drinking water sources. Our project area includes the Mohawk River, about 50 to 60 miles upstream of its confluence with the Hudson River, plus the Hudson River from that confluence south through Ulster and Dutchess counties. And this area includes some river sections that are not officially designated as drinking water sources, but the waters are all connected. So we've included the entire river reaches in our project. The waters in this project area serve nearly 369,000 people, either as a sole source of drinking water or as part of a blend. So the bulk of the work that we did for this project was to obtain and map data about landfill leachate disposal at the wastewater treatment plants in this region. And that necessitated us obtaining information from municipalities that is not routinely made public. We also detailed the environmental regulations around this practice, how they developed, and then pointed out how they're currently failing to protect rivers from leachate pollution, with the number one goal of supporting the discussions needed to develop better practices. So next slide. Why do we care if landfill leachate is put into our drinking water? And this figure shows the steps of leachate disposal and the legislation that regulates each of those steps. To define leachate is water percolates through the material in a landfill. It picks up a mixture of different substances from the decomposing waste and produces a liquid called leachate. That can include heavy metals, pesticides, and a broad array of synthetic chemicals, man-made chemicals that are contained in consumer goods or in industrial wastes. These synthetic chemicals, many of which are petroleum-based, include substances such as flame retardants, plasticizers, dyes, non-stick coatings, water repellent coatings, things that make life convenient, but for the vast majority of them, we lack information about the risks associated with exposures via air and water and soil. Right now, EPA lists approximately 86,000 chemicals registered for use in US manufacturing and commerce. And most of them are quite poorly studied. However, we do know that they may break down very slowly in the environment and they may affect living beings in very low concentrations, with some of the effects of exposures appearing only generations after the exposure. So PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, are one example of the kinds of substances that we're talking about. And we did come back to them a lot in our work because there is a lot of information relatively about them right now, but they're by no means the only group. They're an illustration of the risks of leachate. So modern landfills, you can see with the blue square or the blue circle here, modern landfills are required to take extensive measures to contain leachate because of these risks. And that has been required since the 1970s under the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. Next slide. If the landfill discharges leachate directly from the site, the Clean Water Act governs that discharge via a speedies permit, and the leachate is required to be treated to some extent before it is released into surface water. However, once the leachate is collected, the standard practice is to send it either by pipe or by truck to a municipal wastewater treatment plant for disposal. Next slide. So that standard practice also began about 40 years ago, and it's really the crux of the leachate loophole in my eyes, because wastewater treatment plants are designed to treat human waste, and they are regulated under the Clean Water Act with that goal of human waste in mind. So they're not equipped to remove or break down the types of synthetic chemicals that are found in landfill leachate, and they're not required to do that. So as a result, landfill leachate passes through wastewater treatment plants into the Hudson estuary and the Mohawk River in the very same areas that are used for drinking water. Next slide. The burden of treating this water and ensuring that the water is safe to drink falls to the communities that operate the drinking water treatment plants and is regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act. So in summary, in overview, we have a system that requires landfills to prevent the release of landfill leachate and control its disposal very carefully because it is known to be a hazardous material, then allows, as a standard practice, that pollution to be dispersed back into the environment, and then turns around and requires communities who use these rivers for drinking water to clean up the water. So even though you can see here that we have regulations to protect the water at each step of this process, there is a loophole that allows this irrational practice of leachate disposal through municipal treatment plants. The system, it doesn't exist because it is the best way of doing things. It exists because it came into being decades ago as landfill regulations were tightened based on assumptions about polluting chemicals that we now know are poor assumptions. Those assumptions include the assumption that chemicals are safe at very low concentrations, that chemicals break down very rapidly in the environment, assumption that you can regulate one chemical at a time and control these systems efficiently. So these regulations that we have not kept up with what we now know to be true about the nature of pollution in our water. Next slide. So to summarize some of the main results of our work, some of our main findings, our research shows that in the project area, about 89 million gallons of landfill leachate were discharged into the Mohawk River and the Hudson River estuary via wastewater treatment plants each year from 2019 to 2023. This includes 6 wastewater treatment plants in the Mohawk and 8 in the Hudson, and those are listed here on this slide. And you can also see that a slightly larger portion of that leachate is being dumped into the Hudson River versus the Mohawk. About municipal wastewater treatment plants, I just want to say that operators have long held the view that handling leachate is part of their duty, part of a civic duty, and that they are providing an important service. And it is true that they are accepting leachate in compliance with their operating permits, and that they are accepting leachate in accordance with standard practice, but those facts don't make it a good practice. Next slide. The leachate that we're talking about here comes both from active landfills and from inactive landfills. So the number of inactive landfills that are contributing this leachate is much greater than active. We have 17 inactive landfills and 7 active landfills, but the volume of leachate from active landfills is much greater. So the vast majority of the leachate that is flowing through wastewater treatment plants in this area is actually from active landfills. 78 million gallons over the period that we looked at coming from active landfills. And this is because active landfills are open so that they can continue to receive waste. And so they're open to precipitation, whereas inactive landfills are closed and capped. And this points out the fact that actively operating landfills generate much more leachate. And one key to diminishing this discharge is potentially to close landfills and to reduce the number of open landfills that we have operating. Next slide. And then, as I mentioned earlier, 259,000 people are drinking from the Hudson River, the Mohawk River, or connected groundwaters as a sole drinking water source, and 109,000 more people are drinking as part of blended water. So leachate that is being contained and controlled at landfills should not be released into these drinking water sources. The best place to treat it is at the landfill. The technology to do that is available. It is being used in places where communities demand it, but it is not required for all landfills in New York State to do that. So we're hoping here that this information that we're putting forth and this discussion that we're attempting to start can support communities in changing this practice. Thanks.
Thanks, Jen. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our colleague, Captain John Lipscomb, the person who set us all on this journey. Captain John became Riverkeeper's boat captain in 2000, and since then, John has been patrolling the Hudson for Riverkeeper aboard the R. Ian Fletcher, a 36-foot Chesapeake Bay style wooden vessel. From April into December every year, he traveled approximately 4,000 to 5,000 nautical miles between New York Harbor, Rome on the Mohawk, and Fort Edwards on the Upper Hudson, searching out and deterring polluters, monitoring tributaries and waterfront facilities, conducting a sampling program to measure fecal contamination, and supporting other scientific studies, and taking regional decision makers and media out on the river so that the river had a chance to advocate for itself. John has received numerous awards, including the Environmental Quality Award in 2011, presented by former US EPA Region 2 Administrator Judith Enck. We're honored and fortunate to have John as our technical advisor for this project. And I'm going to ask John to come on camera, and I'll let him take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. And thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. It's a great pleasure for me to work with this team on this issue. If you can pull up the slide of Croton landfill, there we go. Just some historic context for me. My awareness of this issue started a long time ago. I began at Riverkeeper in 2000, and just before 2000, Riverkeeper published a book. John Cronin published a book, and in that book was a story about this landfill. And 1985, they got a tip that the county, Westchester County, was going to pump all the leachate from the ponds into the river on a day when no one would notice. And they chose Christmas morning. Cronin got a tip. They showed up and busted Westchester. It's great work. That's how, just as a side, that's how Riverkeeper works. Riverkeeper works with the public to protect the river. In 1987, there was a court case, Riverkeeper and the feds against Westchester County. And then there was a settlement. And I want to read to you out of the book how the settlement was described. It says, Westchester agreed to a settlement with Riverkeeper and the feds. The discharges were halted. Tank trucks began to regularly pick up the leachate for disposal at a treatment facility. Time for drinks, right? Time for cocktails. We won. Everything's problem solved, correct? Not at all. What was happening is that these trucks that were going to, quote, treatment were just taking the leachate to sewer plants. In fact, the sewer plant that's right in Ossining, right next to the Riverkeeper office. And so in the end, the river was getting all of it anyway, whether it was a direct discharge from the landfill or a discharge through the sewage treatment plant in Ossining, a mile and a half away. The river was getting it all. We were fooled. We took the word treatment too seriously. We didn't investigate, and we didn't follow the pollution to the very end. So before I go on, I want everyone, we've heard from Jen, we've heard all about this problem, we've heard how leachate is created, but just stop for a second and think about what leachate is. Think about it. Think about all the toxic chemical and biological waste that's in a landfill. Cleaning supplies, paint, automotive products, all the things Jen listed. Fertilizers, insecticides. The list of toxic material that our society uses on a daily basis is stunning. And when the container is empty, it goes in the trash, it goes to the landfill. So now you've imagined this incredible mix of waste in these landfills that are a mile long, some of them, more, and 10 stories tall, some of them. You pour water on the top in the form of rainwater, and you let that rainwater percolate down through all that waste, picking up a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And out of the bottom, you extract this unbelievably toxic zombie soup from the landfill. As I think about this problem, I find myself struggling to imagine how we could pollute water any more than this. I don't know that there's more polluted water than this. Leachate is disgusting beyond words. And it's important. It's important. I'm emphasizing that because it's important never to forget that leachate isn't a word. It's something that is horribly toxic. So I'm really proud of this team for taking on this kind of systemic issue. When I started at Riverkeeper in 2000, we were still in what I call the old mode, where we were going after discrete specific polluters, whether it was Exxon or GE or communities with illicit sewer hookups or businesses discharging waste into a waterway. They were traditional pollution enforcement in that there was a discrete polluter in most cases. What's happening now is that happily, that kind of pollution is, in my opinion, less. But what remains are these systemic sources of pollution that are caused by our own society. We are the polluter. So, you know, is it our microplastics? Is it our sewage? Is it our PFAS? Is it leachate? These are all systemic contaminants that society produces that we are now, as a society, allowing to be discharged into our waterways. And I want to not forget to congratulate the DEC for stating their intention to revisit the leachate issue. That's exactly what's needed. You know, with traditional discrete polluters, you went after the discrete polluter. Well, here the whole state is a polluter. We are all the polluter. And so a state level action is the only way to make progress. Finally, a couple, again, contextual things. This team is framing this initiative around drinking water, contamination to drinking water. And that's because we know that that's going to grab the public's attention. But none of us should forget that this river, the Mohawk River, the Hudson River, New York Harbor, is a home to countless aquatic creatures that have no choice but to live here. And they can't go buy bottled water or get a water filter. They live and breathe this contaminated water. And the second point that's very important to remember is that this river is not a healthy and young river. Some people refer to it as America's founding river. It has suffered terribly since Europeans arrived in North America, since the industrial age. And, you know, this river is one of the largest Superfund sites in the United States because of General Electric and their PCBs. So you can't additionally pollute a river that's been brought to its knees. It's not okay to continue to pollute the Hudson River. We as a society need to decide the river's paid enough price for us, and now we have to find a way of living in health with the river, in mutual health. No more pollution, no more discharges, no more cost-saving regimens that harm the river and benefit us. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'm gonna just let everybody take that in. So before we move on to our next panelist, we'd like to take a moment to thank Todd Oman, who's the managing attorney at Pace Environmental Litigation Clinic, for his invaluable support on this project. The Pace Environmental Litigation Clinic is a unique resource offering legal strategies and research to frontline communities that lack the resources to hire an environmental attorney. Through the clinic, we've had the support of student interns that include Cassie Seavey and Justina Maximuk, who provided invaluable research for this report. We've been working on this now for 19 months, and we finally got it out in December, so we've had a lot of help along the way. Since the fall, we've had the pleasure to work with Hannah Duray, our third student intern at Pace Law Environmental Litigation Clinic. Hannah is pursuing a specialty certificate in environmental law and is passionate about using the legal system, whether through policy or litigation, to secure people's right to a healthy environment. With the climate crisis disproportionately affecting vulnerable communities, she is particularly focused on advocating for those most at risk. Much of her work combines law and research with a focus on human health in the face of toxic exposure, pollution, and extreme heat. So I'd like to introduce Hannah Duray.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Today, I want to share with you a little bit more about the nitty-gritty legal problems of how we got here, and then also some legal opportunities for us to remedy the landfill leachate issue. This is going to be a bit of a crash course. I know some of you have backgrounds in this, so please excuse a little bit of oversimplification. So to begin, I want to talk about legal issues, and there's 3 laws that I'd like to focus on. The first is the Environmental Conservation Law. And this is a New York law that set up the Department of Environmental Conservation and its objectives. And when it was created, it created rules and regulations pertaining to waste. And in turn, it created rules about leachate. But as you heard, it really only has to do with collection. Lots of requirements for how the leachate is collected, but it doesn't really say what happens afterwards. If the landfill were to discharge it themselves, then they'd start getting into Clean Water Act territory. And so instead, they usually end up shipping it to a wastewater treatment facility because they already interact with the Clean Water Act. So they keep everything in their silos. So now we're at our second law, which is the Clean Water Act. Now, this is a federal law that is administered by the EPA. However, states can get delegated authority to implement their own versions if they meet the federal requirements or if they exceed them. New York is one of those states, and so we issue what's called State Pollutant Discharge Elimination Systems permits, or SPEDIES permits. And these are permits for anything from a point source discharging into waters. And this is where we get into some of the real issues, which is that SPEDIES permits are really limited in their scope in terms of what contaminants are actually monitored for and taken out. The second issue is that these permits get renewed every 5 years, except DEC is completely overburdened by the amount of permits. And so a lot of them just get administratively reviewed, which is basically just like a green light to keep continuing on business as usual. So we have very old requirements for modern facilities. The third issue is that if we want to regulate more contaminants, the burden is on the agency to show why. They have to show that there is significant scientific evidence about the contaminant and its harms. They need to show that it can be detected in these waters. They need to issue a rulemaking, which is a very long process. And they also need to show economic feasibility. And so all of these things have to hold up in a court of law after the rulemaking process and where it's inevitably going to be challenged by industry lobbyists. So this really complex process for getting something done as an agency, when it becomes so cumbersome, it's called regulatory ossification. So instead, we just have these wastewater treatment facilities taking leachate because, as Jen said, they feel like it's their civic duty, discharging it, not violating their permits because their permits are not as robust as they need to be. And then we hit our third law, which is the Safe Drinking Water Act, the last stop for if water is going to be drank by the public. It follows the same scheme where the EPA is the one that's administering it, but states can take that over if they meet the federal standards or exceed it. But it also faces the same hurdles in terms of the administrative burden for actually regulating contaminants that could be hazardous to our health. They need to show that there's, again, scientific evidence that it's actually causing hazardous health problems, that it's known to occur in public waterways, that it's occurring at a frequency that it needs to be addressed, and that actually taking action on it is going to mitigate the problem. So when you have the interplay of these 3 laws at work, you can see how the leachate is just one problem of all of the things that they're trying to address, and it gets missed. But luckily, there are also some legal opportunities as well. These are some expediency paths that the public can take to compel landfill leachate to be a higher up thing for the agencies to do. It won't change the process that they have to go through to accomplish our goals, but we can signal as people that interact with the systems that this is something that we really care about, and it's something that we want to be taken care of now first. So there's two laws I want to talk about that could really help us get there. The first is the State Administrative Procedure Act, and it governs how procedurally agencies function. And there's a provision within the act that says that anyone, any person, any organization can petition an agency to issue a rulemaking. So this organization has put together some language that they're sending to the DEC in the form of a letter asking for their rulemaking that DEC had actually thought about themselves to push for that to be open to the public. That's our soft ask. This thing that I'm describing in the State Administrative Procedure Act is a bit more formal. And in the instance that DEC does not respond to our advocacy, there is that legal backstop to make a formal ask to the agency and compel their response. And then the last law that I want to talk about is the Green Rights Amendment. This passed in 2021, and it says that each person shall have a right to clean air and water and a healthful environment. 70% of New Yorkers voted for this. So clearly, New Yorkers care about their environmental rights and the health of their environment. But it's been 4 years now, and the courts have not given this language any legal teeth, any legal bite. So it's really time that the public uses what they voted on to push agencies to do a little bit more. Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. So next, I want to talk about when we started working on this project a long time ago. We called ourselves a collaborative because we wanted to wait to become a coalition when we started to work outwardly and talk to our community partners to build a coalition. And so we're at that point now where we're moving in that direction where we're going to build a strong New York State coalition of partners to work on to get the DEC to move forward with regulations through rulemaking and to work together to make sure that the regulations that end up being created are in the likeness of the communities throughout the state that are looking for change. And one of our partners that we're so happy to be working with, our coalition of partners, is Seneca Lake Guardian and Yvonne Taylor, who is a co-founder and has been leading the charge on this issue for a long, long time. Seneca Lake Guardian was conceived by Yvonne and Joseph Campbell. They're founders of Gas Free Seneca, and along with Marianne Kowalski of Seneca Lake Pure Water's board member, when the need for active involvement in the numerous threats to Seneca Lake became apparent. Seneca Lake Guardian is a Waterkeeper affiliate, connecting them to the largest and fastest growing nonprofit solely focused on clean water, uniting more than 300 Waterkeeper organizations and affiliates that are on the front lines of the global water crisis, patrolling miles of rivers, lakes, and coastal waterways on 6 continents where the goal is drinkable, fishable, and swimmable water everywhere. Yvonne lives on the east side of Seneca Lake on land that has been in her family for generations. And it's a real honor and a pleasure to be working with Yvonne on this project. I'll turn it over to her now.
Good evening, and thank you for your excellent work, Rebecca, Jennifer, John, and Pace University. And thanks to all who have joined us tonight. Seneca Lake Guardian is leading the fight to shut down Seneca Meadows, which is the state's largest landfill, which is located in Seneca Falls, New York. This extremely well-researched report reveals a devastating truth about landfill leachate contaminating water sources in the Mohawk and Hudson rivers. but it also exemplifies a more endemic problem across New York State. It's a stark reminder of the dangers posed by our throwaway culture and the urgent need for action. Next slide, please, Rebecca. Here in New York, Seneca Meadows landfill represents the worst of these dangers. Every year, nearly 60 million gallons of toxic leachate contaminated with PFAS and other hazardous chemicals are trucked across the state, polluting waterways, including the Mohawk and Hudson rivers. These chemicals, known as forever chemicals, persist in our environment, threatening our health, our ecosystems, and our future. In 2023, the city of Amsterdam began accepting leachate from Seneca Meadows landfill. In 1 month, the city's wastewater treatment plant discharged 414,000 gallons of leachate from the Seneca Meadows landfill into the Mohawk River, upstream of the Great Flats aquifer and surface water intakes. The solutions are clear. The DEC must act now to ensure new regulations for treatment and disposal of landfill leachate and to prevent contamination from spreading. But I think we need to think even bigger, eliminating the use of PFAS chemicals in products and transitioning to a zero waste circular economy where landfills are a last resort is truly the only way to protect our water, air, and communities. This fight is personal for those of us in Seneca Falls, where we live with the stench, the truck traffic, and the degraded air quality that's caused by this towering 30-story mountain of garbage that we're collecting from all over New York State. And while we're bearing the burden of the entire state's trash, this is not just a Finger Lakes problem. It's a problem for all of us, as you can see. Toxic water from Seneca Meadows doesn't stop at the landfill's border. Communities across New York, New Jersey, and beyond are being poisoned by this landfill's output. So that's why we're calling on all New Yorkers to stand with us, join us in demanding a sustainable future for New York by closing Seneca Meadows when its permit expires this year, December of 2025, and call on the DEC to adopt new regulations for treatment and disposal of leachate from landfills. Because together, I'm confident that we can protect our drinking water, our health, and our shared environment for generations to come. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Yvonne. So now we get into this portion here where we want to show you, along with our report, we've created a website, and the website contains everything that you need to understand the leachate loophole. And it's leachateloophole.org. That's been dropped into the chat for you to see. Here we have on our homepage a story map that's a very simple approach to being able to see how the leachate loophole works. And it's meant for the public to help immediately give them a sense of what's happening and why. We have a who we are, so you can learn about our team briefly. Much of what we've said tonight is here in this who we are tab. We have a take action. So in the midst of organizing this report, we started in May of 2023, and we learned in the summer of, in June or July, that the DEC was getting ready to announce a rulemaking or new regulations for leachate, and their language is on-site treatment and disposal of leachate at landfills. So it was our good fortune that we could put these materials together to get everybody on the same page so that when the rulemaking began, we could provide excellent public comments and to get, as I said earlier, the regulations to be a real reflection of this problem. So our action is here. Take action, and you can see the language that we have. You can add your own context, and you can send your own letter. It goes straight to Joseph O'Connell, who is organizing as the point person for the solid waste and for the actual rulemaking, as well as Sean Mahar, who's the acting or interim commissioner at the DEC. Of course, you can send your own letter too. And we're going to be sending around a video and all sorts of helpful materials, a toolkit that has a draft letter too, that you as a municipality, as a CAC, as a county, as a community group, you can also send your own letters. The goal is to get the DEC to move faster than they would ever move without there being efficient, effective public push. You'll also find our report. It's going to take you away from our website. It's a Google Doc, and it's 45 pages long. Be sure to go to the end, to the appendix, where you can see all of the data that we've collected. It's all just public information through foiling that helped us to put the information together that we have, and it shows you what we've collected. There's a web map, and the web map allows you to play around with the data. So you can turn on wastewater treatment plants and drinking water intakes and landfills and volumes to see where this landfill leachate is moving, where it's going in our small bite at the apple project area. But this is a problem statewide. This is a problem nationwide. And so we hope that we can show you by taking, as I said, a bite at the apple, that you can actually see enough of this so we can connect the dots and work together on a statewide, in a state way, to make changes for the better. We have resources here for communities who want to see where landfills might be in their communities, to be able to locate where your drinking water source is, and a zero waste hierarchy page that's really excellent, that helps municipalities, counties, the state see how they can implement zero waste practices, because that's a big part of this a big conversation that goes along with our materials. Our press and a donation link, we'll talk about that in a minute, as well as our contact and mailing list. And you're welcome to send any communications to us through our contact page. So I just wanted to give you an overview, just so that you understand how to use this website, so that you can take advantage of all of the materials that we've created for New York State residents and beyond. So the action, we're getting to the end of it here, and our action is to tell New York State that they must adopt new regulations for on-site treatment and disposal of leachate at landfills. Now, as I said, this is their language. They promised to open the rulemaking in 2023, or they promise might be a strong word. They suggested they would do it in 2023. They put it in the regulatory agenda in 2024, and now we're at 2025. So we really want to see the DEC open this process as soon as possible. And this is our action, as I described before, in our Take Action page on our website, where you'll see our language, and we've made it really simple for you to be able to write to the DEC and to get this process moving. And we want to work together to make big changes in New York State and beyond. So visit this page, and we'll drop it into the chat so that you can click on that link later and give it a read and join us. So finally, I just wanted to land on this really, this image that we've found, which is the leachate from the Fresh Kills landfill leachate treatment plant in Staten Island, New York. And I wonder if I could ask Captain John to come back in and close us up for the evening before we get into the question and answer segment of this presentation.
Yeah, thank you. So before I had prepared a close, but I want to reinforce what Rebecca just said about taking action. In my time, 24 years with Riverkeeper, I had numerous occasions where DEC, high-level DEC officials would say to me, they would never write it, they would say to me face to face, "You didn't push us enough on this case," or you weren't tough enough on this case. And they were teaching me how to work with them. They need someone to hold up the high gospel, because as Hannah described, they have to factor a whole number of things as they make a rule or as they change a rule. And it's almost guaranteed to not be as ideal as one would want. So speak up. Give them the high gospel. Tell them what's right and tell them what's wrong. And they will use that to make their rule better. So now you know what leachate is and you know where it's going. So for each of you, do you want this stuff in your drinking water? Do you want this stuff in your shower? Do you want this stuff in your neighborhood swimming pool? Do you want to water your lawn with this stuff? Do you want to wash your baby in water that has this stuff? Of course not. Some are going to say, oh, come on, it's just a little bit. But remember that it's just about money. That's what most pollution is. So by accepting this wastewater in your drinking water and in your beloved river, you are saving landfills money. Is that okay? It's certainly not with me. Polluting a living river that is a drinking water source with this kind of toxic poison to save landfills and communities a buck is not okay. It's not okay, and we will not accept it. Thank you.
Thanks, John. All right, we're going to open up some Q&A here with you all. And as I said earlier, if we're not able to get to all of your questions, you can write to us. And we're going to drop that contact into the chat. And please reach out with your questions and we'll answer them as soon as we can. We also want to ask you to support this important campaign, and that you can consider, if you could consider, making a tax-deductible contribution of any size through our fiscal sponsor, Good Work Institute. You can do so here at leachateloophole.org/donate, and we'll put that also into the chat.